Just say the word, Marcus.
John. Go.
Good. Welcome. I'm John Diaz, the editorial page editor for the San Francisco Chronicle, and today we're fortunate to have with us for a discussion on the changing city. We have former mayor and current lieutenant governor Gavin Newsom. Welcome, Gavin. Deputy editor Lois Kazikoff with us as well. And
Hello.
we have editorial writer Marshall Kildoff, who actually wrote the City on the Edge editorial that you saw in yesterday's Insight, which really took a look at some of the challenges and the opportunities that San Francisco really faces right now with this unprecedented wave of prosperity. I also have with me off camera Spencer Whitney, who is our assistant editor, who is monitoring questions that are coming in on Twitter, and we've had some good ones already. If you are following this live Google chat, a first for our editorial board, and have a question that you would like to ask on Twitter, just go to Twitter and use the hashtag AskGavinSF, and we will select some of the questions to get on air. First of all, may I call you Gavin, or Lieutenant Governor? It's a little cumbersome to say Lieutenant Governor.
John, you should have just walked the streets with me getting here. I was called just about everything imaginable. Gavin sounds really good.
Well, we will make sure we don't get into any of those names, Gavin. Let me start by asking you, I'm sure you had a chance to read our City on the Edge editorial yesterday, and certainly you and I have talked before about this really dramatic change that San Francisco is going through right now. How much of this, you were mayor for 8 years, how much of this did you anticipate? How much of this had you hoped for? And what has surprised you about what we're seeing in San Francisco right now?
Two things surprised me. One is how surprised people are, and that's the first thing. And two is how sustainable this seems to be. And so let me unpack both. We lived through this. I was a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Willie Brown was mayor at the time. In the late 1990s, we were doing emergency supplementals to keep nonprofit art organizations in place. We lost a number of them, some high-profile music venues in 3rd Street corridor. People were very, very fearful. There was an extraordinary backlash that manifested, John, specifically not only in our diverse communities, but also at City Hall. It radically changed the politics in San Francisco. Willie Brown had a difficult time getting reelected, had a write-in candidate. Members of the Board of Supervisors, my colleagues, were dismissed after one term. Most lost their reelection. The Planning Commission was reconstituted. The Board of Appeals was reconstituted. There was a lot of change and a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety and a lot of laws established, anti-eviction laws. There was a lot of tenancy advocacy work that was done that manifested in some very progressive policy, and a lot of that is carried over. Now, number two that is different is that this doesn't seem to be a boom-bust cycle. These companies tend to be more sustainable. They're earning real revenue. They just didn't put a .com at the end of their brand. And the concern now is if it continues for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then yes, it could dramatically change the face of the city in a way that could have real ramifications into our future.
If I could jump in, Gavin, what would you do that shows you've learned a little bit from the past? What are some changes you might invoke right now to smooth things out? We really are going through a rough patch. A lot of the same issues that you brought up are very current right now. Eviction problems, high housing costs, loss of cultural life, those very same things.
Yeah, I think that's the great struggle for the mayor's office and, frankly, for progressive members of the Board of Supervisors, not just more moderate and pro-tech or pro-business members. We have the highest minimum wage that exists today at $10.67 in the nation. We have the only paid sick leave of any universal health care for undocumented residents, not just documented residents. We have the highest inclusionary housing set-asides for new construction. We've been doing a lot of really progressive things, and of course a number of new pro-tenant legislation that the board has passed supporting and supplementing a lot of the work that was done in the late 1990s, you've all been talking about. So it's a very difficult thing. There's not a lot of tools left in the toolkit. And so it begs the question moving forward, what specifically can we do? Well, there's a number of good things that I don't see getting as much attention as they perhaps deserve. The one is the incredible pressure on housing in San Francisco. The obvious median price of rentals now over $3,000, $1 million+ for a home. It's a supply-demand issue, simple as that. How do you address a supply-demand issue? You build more supply or you decrease demand. I'm of the opinion you've got to decrease demand because rather increase supply versus decreasing demand because we are selling a great product, San Francisco, and that means as a consequence we've got to fill the need and the void by building more housing, more affordable and workforce housing, so low income and median income housing, and strengthen our efforts to do that. And that's, of course, what the mayor is proposing. He's got a very aggressive initiative. I did something called 15.5 when I was mayor, 15,000 housing units, 5,000 below market rate, affordable for medium or very low income. We were successful even during the recession achieving that. The mayor, of course, wants to double that. Two of the areas, though, that deserve some attention that I think are going to create some relief is the Bayview Hunters Point development, the Treasure Island development. And just those two new zonings, old but new in terms of new housing in the pipeline, represent about 20,000 housing units. I recall we did about 32% affordable requirement in the Bayview sites, and obviously 30% on Treasure Island. You've got the Transbay Terminal with all its challenges that should provide some relief. I just drove by Trinity Plaza, which is about 1,900 units. You're seeing a lot of housing units now go up. We've seen higher percentage set-asides for affordable housing. We've got to continue to do more of that. And of course, we've got to, and I'm sure this will be part of the conversation, engage the tech community, engage those who are benefiting the most in the solution.
Gavin, if I could go to a question that that came in on Twitter from @TranscendUs, which I think goes to really the essence of what a lot of San Franciscans are feeling right now. And the question is, how can we preserve San Francisco's culture when you have an influx of so many people from so many different states? This particular Twitter follower worries that a lot of time that he and a lot of longtime San Franciscans worry that San Francisco is losing not only its identity but kind of its progressive edge. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, there are a lot of newcomers here to San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, look, we do pluralism better than any city in any state in the country. That's our greatness, is our ability not just to tolerate that diversity, but to celebrate it and to unite around the things that bind us together. What Dr. King talks so evocatively about, that we're all bound together by a web of mutuality. That's part of the reason the tech community wants to be in San Francisco, is that remarkable diversity, the cultural diversity, the ethnic, religious diversity that exists, and obviously part of that diversity was a celebration of marriage equality as we've tried to advance and be the tip of the spear on that. And so you're right, look, businesses can't thrive in a world that's failing. And when we have this great Gatsby curve that's manifested, Alan Kruger refers to this income inequality, the acuity of it is the great Gatsby curve that's manifesting as acutely here than any city in the country, that has to be reconciled. You can't live, as Aristotle said, a good life in an unjust society. And so those that have been fortunate enough to participate in this growth, in this concentration of wealth, in an economy where we're going from something old to something new, and the whitewater changes all around us, I think have a unique responsibility to step up and give back and contribute, and to be part not just of the solution in the context of writing checks, but be part of the creativity, the innovation that can be injected into policy-making approaches to begin to solve the problems of homelessness and the acuity that manifests on the streets and sidewalks, to address the affordability challenge, to address the incredible socioeconomic realities, ethical, moral challenges we have in our education system, particularly those in the African American, Latino community, and address the health disparities that still are challenging our city. So I think, at the end of the day, that's the #1 economic driver, is preserving that mix that was just referenced, and maintaining that vibrancy and diversity and cultural identity that we've had as our birthright since 1850.
Gavin, San Francisco right now has so many problems that a lot of cities would die to have. Detroit, not just Detroit. Obviously, we have an ambulance going by, so San Francisco has some urgent problems at the moment as well. But a lot of cities in the country, will shake their heads and worrying about, that San Francisco is worrying about gentrification. We're worried about the value of housing going up so much. We're worried that our restaurants are being overrun. Let me ask you, is gentrification just a natural side effect of prosperity that we have to accept as part of the period that we're going through?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Again, we try to mitigate that. We still want to make investments. I much prefer walking down Market Street today than when I was mayor. It's substantially improved, and it's available to more and more people. And you're seeing families now rediscover the UN Plaza and rediscover 5th and 6th Street. It still has a long way to go. So I like to see that investment. Same time, I want to see that we're maintaining our investment in the cultural identity, which goes back to arts, which is something you guys wrote about this weekend, which is spot on. And by the way, it was arts, John, when we talked about that first question, when we did the central partnership, the central market partnership when I was mayor, where we had the early discussions with Twitter about a tax break, et cetera. But we led with sitting down there in my budget speech down on 6th Street before I left as mayor, talking about this new partnership and revitalizing Market Street, is we led with arts. It was dance and music. We got the Black Arts Foundation to come over from the East Bay into that 6th Street corridor. We talked about public art. We talked about revitalizing the street, creating energy with food vendors and nightlife. That I think is incredibly important. So you can balance just the macro capitalistic urges of investment, but you've got to have that counter-prevailing focus of intentionality on what that investment looks like in terms of incentivizing nonprofits, creating the conditions where you've got the right set-asides, and that you're not just allowing the macro market forces to completely disrupt and disperse everybody that, frankly, has been out there trying to make a go of it and is part of the remarkable.
I could jump in with another thought on the same line. Does it make sense to spread the wealth? Can you imagine a political leader in this city saying, why don't you take this promising new business to Oakland, to Sacramento, to somewhere else? Is that an answer? And also, is it likely to ever really happen that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, I imagine a lot of people are saying that, and that's part of the backlash, and I don't think that's particularly healthy. I mean, investment's good. As I said, not only is market improved, there are other parts of the city that are improving, and as a consequence, every part of the city is improving. You've got a huge amount of wealth coming into the city's general fund that allows more money into those arts programs and enriching our neighborhood libraries, keeping the hours of operation extended, allowing us more recreation, investing in our parks and playgrounds, and obviously our schools, universal preschool, universal after school, arts education, every child, every classroom, K through 12, wellness centers back in our public schools, all supported by this boom, all very, very positive things. That said, you hit it this weekend when you guys wrote about this notion of regionalism. There is a fundamental question that we have to ask and answer, and it's not a popular one, and as mayor, I wouldn't be promoting this, but as lieutenant governor, perhaps I'm better positioned to promote it, and that's regionalism. Maybe you can't do everything. Maybe we can't be everything to everybody as a small 47.5 square mile landlocked city. But we certainly have the opportunity to reach out regionally and begin to address our challenges and be part of this larger fabric, not just economic fabric, but this broader community that exists outside of our borders. And therein lies a great challenge, because what happens is you've got mayors who come and go, you have regional bodies that have own incentive structures, not necessarily to work collaboratively, but to be more competitive for federal resources and state resources. And so I think this notion of regions rising together has to be part of the thesis, part of the answer to the challenges, not only in San Francisco, but the prospective challenges that are beginning to manifest in Oakland and other parts of this region that are facing similar challenges.
And let's be direct about that, Gavin. It's certainly my observation from being editorial page editor over the last 18 years that regionalism that you're talking about is not really happening. That especially whether it's transportation, we just had Measure BB come in with Alameda County with their proposal. It was not a regional plan. It was an Alameda County plan. Whether it comes to land use planning, I mean, did you see any signs during your 8 years as mayor that there's really any real regionalism going on?
Only one, John, only one. It was in the emergency response side, and it was something you can look back. I don't want to bore people, but we had something called Urban Areas Security Initiative, UASI, and we went after federal grants right after 9/11, which were ample to improve our emergency communications network, our interoperability, et cetera. Well, it was nice to have Speaker Nancy Pelosi in your backyard, and we were very aggressive, and we dominated most of those federal dollars. comparing ourselves to other parts of the region. And then the Bush administration, interestingly, a few years later decided to change the UASI grants to SUASI grants, these super urban area grants, and it forced us, it compelled us to focus more regionally. I worked then with Mayor Brown in Oakland at the time and Mayor Reed down in San Jose, and we announced these joint grants that we received, particularly on the interoperability side. So the question is, how do you want to move the mouse, you got to move the cheese. You've got to change incentives. And the incentives in this case, the cheese is money. Change incentives for good behavior. And I'll tell you, the state of California should be much more aggressive in terms of organizing its grant making for all of these projects across the board, from transportation, housing, and jobs linkages, and focus on forcing and compelling that kind of regionalism. Otherwise, you're going to have mayors doing their job for their constituencies and trying to do it a little bit better at the expense of others. And so I think that's a fundamental shift. Again, as this pyramid is inverted to a regional approach to solving problems as opposed to site-specific approach.
Gavin, to get the leadership of the state, would it require state legislation? Could it be done administratively? Because it's hard for me to imagine any legislators coming forth and saying, okay, here is what we need to do. We need to think more regionally instead of their own provincial concerns. You know,
it's interesting. You know, Darrell Steinberg did an amazing job with something called realignment. It actually began early in the Wilson administration, some components of realignment. Steinberg was its principal champion. It was finally embraced by Governor Brown. It was around mostly the crisis with our prisons, forcing realignment of state dollars to the local level. But there's attributes to that framework. So again, it's a way of answering your question. I know we have limited time, but looking at the model of realignment and broadening it beyond just the acuity crisis response on the issue of prison overcrowding and forcing support at the local level for jails and alternative sentencing, but beginning to broaden that to other parts of the state budget.
Lois, it looked like you wanted to jump in with a question. Lois, are you there? Okay, let me, Lois, I see you're on mute. Go ahead, you're now off mute. Lois, the mic is yours.
I just wanted to say that clearly the answers to us are a regional answer. And you've talked about moving the money around, and that's important, but how do you frame the problems in a way that the regional approach is the way to go at it? Transportation is a huge problem here. Housing is a huge problem. How can you frame it in a way that people will say, yes, we have to change the way we've been doing things?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you mentioned transportation. We've done it reasonably well. I mean, the whole idea that Transbay Terminal was in this notion of creating this Grand Central Station on the west coast of the United States was really to secure the fate and future of the economy from a regional perspective and base it in that new downtown, the new emerging downtown in San Francisco, by bringing all of these, the East Bay transit systems, the South Bay, and to the extent there's vestiges of North Bay, with the Golden Gate Transit and others, all in this one central hub. So we have sort of an historic construct around transportation with BART and other things that we could build off in Caltrans. The challenge is, you're right, with housing funding and with social service funding, that's where we, I think, have to step up the game. And again, Governor Brown, I think, substantially supports this model, bottom up, not top down, that we shouldn't be, you know, someone described it, the state government should be big on what, but small on how. Big on solving these big challenges we're referencing, but less prescriptive on how we actually solve them. And that innovative spirit at the local level and the regional level can be the tip of the spear for creative and entrepreneurship. But regionalism can't just be personality based. Again, we have to structurally look at reforming how we get not just state dollars down to the regional basis, but federal money as well down to the state and our regional partners.
Just a reminder of those of you who are watching this, and I really appreciate you joining in, you can participate as well. If you have questions that you would like to ask the Lieutenant Governor, use the hashtag AskGavinSF, and we have Spencer Whitney, our assistant editor, is dutifully taking down your questions. I want to bring Marshall Kildoff into the conversation. Marshall, if you can unmute your microphone. Marshall, you really did, I thought, a tremendous job in doing the research and writing for the City on the Edge piece in Sunday Insight. Marshall, one of the things that I think surprised you in your reporting and surprised us was what you found out about evictions. That the concern that there's wide-scale evictions in San Francisco. How did that pan out, Marshall? What did you find?
Well, the city has 370,000 units. Not all of them are rent-controlled, obviously, maybe less than half. But the eviction numbers are like 300 or 400 units. It's a substantial number, nonetheless. More than the number, though, it engenders a great deal of fear. And I think people are poised to worry about whether they'll be next, even if they may not be. I wondered what a state figure like you can contribute to this understanding. Should people not be so concerned, or are there useful laws that would alleviate this tension, this worry that's in the air?
Yeah, I mean, and I noted that in reading your report. I mean, it does put things in perspective. We use percentage terms on Alice Act evictions, and it's alarming percentage. But at the end of the day, in terms of the overall aggregate, it's relatively diminished or modest. That said, I remember my mother down at 15 Rico Way was kicked out of her unit when she was going through cancer therapy, and at the time it wasn't widespread, but for her it was devastating, and it was done for the family and for all of us. And so I can imagine for the thousands of people over the last few years living on the edge, that anxiety is real. That said, I got to give a lot of props to members of the Board of Supervisors, the mayor, and others. I don't know another city in the country. I really don't know any city in the country that does more to try to protect tenants in that respect. I mean, we are a rent-controlled city, one of the few remaining in the country. We certainly have a lot of protections as it relates to those evictions and requirements that landlords step up in ways other cities don't. And I don't know that many more things that can be done except save one, which I know is the backdrop of a lot of stress, and a statewide official, it's appropriate to ask me and ask all of us, that's the Ellis Act. And of course that has state preemption. There was an effort by the mayor and some of the legislative leaders in Sacramento to amend it, but that gets deep into the DNA of property rights, this fundamental idea and value proposition of property rights. And there's a lot of concern that even if you carve out something in one city, that it will start bleeding over in other parts of the state, and as a consequence, that legislation was killed, even with a Democratic supermajority in Sacramento. So that seems to be the last remaining piece beyond continuing small ball efforts to try to.
Do you think it's useful to? Do you think it's useful to change the Ellis Act in a way that San Francisco's tenant folks seem to prefer, or do you think the law is about right where it is now?
Yeah, it's difficult. I've been very criticized in the past for supporting this fundamental idea and value proposition of property rights. I think someone that makes a big investment has a right within the existing regulatory environment, meaning the rules of the road that have been pre-established, to follow those rules down the path that they determine. So that's my position, and I understand intimately, it was not Mayor Lee's position and others that were up in Sacramento lobbying and working the halls. There's a lot of fear at the state level that happens in San Francisco, not surprising, that it's going to have an impact across the state, and then that fundamental principle will erode substantially across the state of California.
Let's go to a couple of these questions that are coming in on Twitter. I think you actually just addressed the one from Chris Liberti asking about what can be done to find a solution to high rents. I think you addressed that one. But we also had one coming in here. I'm not sure the Twitter handle on it. Oh, this is also from Chris Liberti saying, what do you think should be done to remove the loophole of builders who are not building enough affordable housing? I mean, how much do you think the state can regulate affordable housing and still get? The fact is, San Francisco has a shortage of housing at all levels, and it's really designated.
Well, I mean, look, we have among the highest inclusionary housing requirements, both on-site and off-site in the country. And to the extent you need to enforce those, that's the responsibility of this municipality to enforce the rules that we establish. We also, with these master plans, again, I want to remind people of the 20+ thousand units of housing, and I was part of that as mayor, that we did set aside in two of the most exciting emerging parts of San Francisco, and that's obviously the Baby Hunters Point area, and then by extension Treasure Island, and the opportunity we had there because of these master developments to increase the set-asides to upwards of 30+%. And we're doing that on these sort of spot-zoned large projects as well, one-off, where we're doing substantially higher set-asides than even required under our inclusionary housing. So, you know, I think there is a lot that has been done there. Again, it's just so small compared to the size of the problem. Affordable housing bonds, at the end of the day, you can put another $100 billion up or $100 million. You're not going to build that many units. You can put $1 billion up, you're not going to still have as many units as we're going to need. I did something called Hope SF when I was mayor, that I'm very, very proud of. It's paying huge dividends now, revitalizing our public housing units with mixed income housing units. And as you say, John, not just very low income, but workforce housing. Workforce housing is where jobs go to sleep. It's incredibly overlooked, frustratingly so. I failed miserably the first year I was mayor to do a workforce housing initiative. It was rejected overwhelmingly by the voters. We struggled when I was mayor during the downturn. I think there's a real opportunity to focus on that 80 to 120% of area median income, where we have to, I think, address middle income housing, not just the low income housing.
We've been talking a lot in this session about the unwanted side effects of prosperity and the struggles that a lot of San Franciscans and a lot of the institutions are going through. But at the same time, there's some remarkably positive things that are happening in this city. Certainly, in your portfolio as Lieutenant Governor, one of your missions is economic development. Do you see things that have happened in San Francisco that can be applicable elsewhere to some of the struggling cities in California, or is this just a unique situation?
No, I mean, we had a formula for success. This didn't just happen by accident. I mean, for all the consternation about our public schools in San Francisco, we're the top performing urban school district in the United States, the only one with universal preschool and universal after school that has a real partnership that the voters this year can extend with our public schools that is second to none in terms of building capacity and reconciling the independence of the school district with the city and the county itself. You know, I was just down in Imperial County last Thursday. 25.1% unemployment. To your point, they would love to have the problems San Francisco has. So we've had a formula on education, on infrastructure, and we're rebuilding our public hospitals at $887.4 million public hospital that is envy, I think, the rest of the country when people are shutting down their emergency rooms. We're building ours up, long-term health facilities like Laguna Honda, revitalizing our parks and our playgrounds. We talked about the libraries, the streets, the improvements we're seeing there. Finally, after years and years of difficulty and neglect, we're seeing the same thing happen with public transit, the source of everyone's stress and frustration. That still is so much better when you get outside the city than it feels like when you're living in the city. A lot of areas where we're doing well, we got to invest in our lead, but in so many ways, at the end of the day, the one thing that marks the uniqueness of the city that is challenged in this environment, it is the one thing, as someone whose daughter is sixth generation San Franciscan, is our diversity. It is our godsend. People come to here from all over the world for riches and new beginnings. San Francisco has long had that as part of the great mythology that's been a reality for 150 plus years, and we can't lose sight of that. It's incredibly important to celebrate that, embrace that, and encourage that. And that diversity is, again, ethnic, racial, religious, sexual orientation, rich, poor, everybody with capacity to come here to live their lives out loud. And if we price everybody out except for a certain class, then yes, that's a foundational thing for me, that economic foundation. Because of that fabric, if we lose that, then the economic realities will begin to dissipate as well.
We probably have time for one more quick question. Marshall, Lois, feel free to jump in.
I wanted to ask Gavin about, he's been a big proponent of the tech industry and using the tools of technology to find solutions. What can you suggest at this point? What more can we do? Who can we tap?
Well, you've got some real, extraordinary leaders. When I was mayor, I got very involved in the Twitter concern. Folks I know laying Mayor Lee out, but we actually negotiated the bulk of that deal. In fact, they moved to my old campaign headquarters. I remember showing the founders the site. I say that only to make this point. I do feel a sense of responsibility. We got Zynga, that new headquarters. Salesforce and Benioff celebrated his when we were around. Biotech started to come back. We started creating some conditions, now things are just blown up, and because of the, I think, extraordinary commitment of Mayor Lee and his team to embracing technology. So you're right. I guess it's a way of acknowledging I am a big fan. We're going, industrial economy is running out of gas. We're going from something old to something new. And the combinatorial nature of technology means we ain't seen nothing yet. Therein lies the opportunity of innovation and abundance, and moving away from the conversation we just had about scarcity to one where we can be the tip of the spear in terms of solving these problems and getting the tech community more engaged in social justice and more engaged in addressing these fundamental questions, not again just by writing a check, but by becoming creative in terms of designing solutions to so many of the problems we're having. We're seeing it with Uber, obviously. We're seeing it with everything Benioff, particularly at Salesforce, is doing, trying to raise the bar of responsibility of the tech community to get involved. Open data initiatives coming out of the mayor's office, hackathons to begin to solve social challenges. All these things we should be promoting more and more every single day. And so I'm optimist, and this is a good way to close. I'm long San Francisco. This is the most dynamic and most extraordinary place anywhere in this state, and I would argue the country and the world. And we have to reconcile these problems, and if we do, and we recognize our fate is tied to the fate of others and that we're all in this together, tech community included, and those that have enjoyed great wealth and success in the last decade, then I think the best is yet to come in San Francisco.
Gavin, I want to thank you not only for your time today, but also for your modesty and restraint in answering that tech question without once mentioning your book, Citizenville.
Yeah, well,
I'll go ahead and put the plug in. As one person who did read it, among I'm sure the large audience, it does address a lot of these questions. I also want to thank Marshall, thank Lois, thank Spencer for taking the Twitter questions, and let our audience out there know that we came out with this significant editorial yesterday of the City on the Edge, but we don't want this just to be a monologue here from 5th and Mission, but really a conversation. That conversation continues this Wednesday night, 6 o'clock, Commonwealth Club, where we're going to explore the issue of technology in the city. You can get more information on that, www.commonwealthclub.org, or if you're a Chronicle subscriber, you can get a $12 discount ticket by going to sfchronicle.com/membership. Gavin, that's my plug for the day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.